The aliens called themselves the Vane, a sleek and shimmering race with crystalline exoskeletons and voices that hummed like wind chimes. They had discovered Earth, deemed humanity primitive, and imposed their benevolent judgment upon them. When Dr. Evelyn Hart, a brilliant xenobiologist, spoke out against their occupation of Earth, she was branded a troublemaker. The Vane Council, outraged by her defiance, devised a cruel sentence. She would be exiled to Drakara, a remote world inhabited by the dragons, a dangerous species humanity only knew from myth. The Vane considered the dragons barbaric and uncontrollable, a species they had quarantined rather than eradicated because they couldn't be tamed or reasoned with. Evelyn's sentence was broadcast across Earth and the Vane territories. She stood defiant. As the Vane Chancellor declared, "You value chaos, human. Let us see how you fare among the dragons. Perhaps they will teach you humility." The shuttle that delivered Evelyn to Drakara barely touched down before she was unceremoniously ejected. The planet was harsh. Molten rivers glowed in the distance, and the air shimmered with heat and ash. Mountains loomed, jagged and dark, while a vast sky roared with distant wing beats. Evelyn didn't panic. Instead, she assessed her surroundings, her scientist's mind taking over. She'd studied countless ecosystems in her career, and fear wouldn't serve her here. She found a cave for shelter and began her work, collecting samples, recording observations, and preparing for survival. It wasn't long before they found her. The dragon landed with a ground-shaking thud, its scales iridescent, catching the fiery light of the molten rivers. It was massive, its head alone the size of a small car, with eyes like molten gold. Evelyn did the one thing no one had ever done with dragons. She spoke to it. "I'm not your enemy," she said calmly, holding her ground. "I want to understand you." The dragon snorted, a plume of smoke curling from its nostrils. It watched her, and to Evelyn's shock, she felt a strange, probing presence in her mind. "You do not fear me?" A voice rumbled in her thoughts. She staggered at the telepathic intrusion, but quickly steadied herself. "No, fear won't help me. Or you." Over weeks that turned into months, Evelyn lived among the dragons. She learned their language, which wasn't spoken but sung in ultrasonic tones and projected thoughts. The dragons were intelligent, ancient, and more sophisticated than the Vane had ever imagined. They had their own history, their own culture, a culture the Vane had dismissed as primitive because it didn't conform to their crystalline logic. Evelyn also learned that the dragons weren't merely isolated. They were imprisoned. The Vane had placed bioengineered barriers across Drakara to contain them, cutting them off from their ancestral migratory patterns. The dragons revealed that they had once roamed the stars, their bodies naturally adapted to survive in the vacuum of space. They were the first sapient beings to explore the galaxy, but they had no desire for conquest, only coexistence. When the Vane rose to power, they saw the dragons as a threat and cast them as mindless beasts. Evelyn's fury burned like the molten rivers. The Vane hadn't just misunderstood the dragons. They had actively suppressed them, driven by fear of what they couldn't control. The turning point came when the Vane returned. They sent a probe to Drakara, expecting to find Evelyn dead or broken. Instead, they found her astride the largest dragon they had ever seen, a shimmering titan named Keloris. "You have no right to keep this species imprisoned," Evelyn said, her voice broadcast through the probe's communicator. "You claim to be enlightened, yet you condemn sentient beings to exile because they don't fit your mold. Release them, or we will come for you." The Vane laughed at her audacity, dismissing her as a mere human with delusions of grandeur. That was their final mistake. The dragons had waited millennia for a leader, someone who could bridge the gap between their kind and others. Evelyn was that bridge. Together, they breached the bio-barriers and launched into space, their natural adaptations allowing them to travel without ships. Evelyn rode at the head of the fleet, her bond with Keloris amplifying her telepathic connection to the others. When they reached Vane Prime, the dragons didn't attack. Instead, they formed a vast ring around the planet, their presence an undeniable show of force. Evelyn broadcast a single message: coexistence or extinction. Choose. The vain, for all their arrogance, were not foolish. Faced with the united might of the dragons and the relentless determination of a single human, they relented. The barriers on Drakara were dismantled, and the dragons reclaimed their place among the stars. Evelyn became a legend, not just among humans, but across the galaxy. She had proven that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology or numbers, but its indomitable spirit and its capacity to see potential where others saw only chaos. The vain no longer mocked her name. They spoke it with reverence. And as the dragons soared across the cosmos once more, Evelyn rode at their forefront, a reminder that even in exile, greatness could be found.